Welcome back to Financial Clarity for Doctors, everyone. This is Rachelle Vanderzanden here with Corey Janoff.
I'm here.
Yes, you are. We get a lot of questions from our clients and from couples specifically when they're starting to think about combining finances and what that looks like and what they need to do and what they should do. When realistically, it's a very different process depending on what your goals are and things like that. And then more recently, I think we've been getting more questions about how to untangle the finances when a relationship ends. I think as our client base gets older, unfortunately, that might tend to happen more and more just statistically. So those are two realities for a lot of people. Not everyone deals with one or the other, but it's a big part of the plan when we are thinking about planning with couples. So today we're going to talk about, what's the goal? Where do you live? Like what different things affect what you should be thinking about if you're thinking about combining finances with a partner. And also just getting a good understanding of your partner's situation, asking lots of questions, and a little bit about the process of kind of separating things out if you do end up not staying with that partner. So it's complicated, just like everything in financial planning can be, and just like everything else, it depends on your specific circumstances and where you live and all that kind of stuff too. But to get us started, I think we're gonna a little story.
Yeah, and if you want a deep dive on divorce planning, we did one of our earliest episodes was, or earliest two episodes was like episode 6 and 7, maybe, but way back in late 2019, early
2019.
2020, somewhere around then.
Yeah, yeah.
We had a family planning attorney, Blake Van Zyl, on and spent a good amount of time talking about a divorce and prenups and postnups. So if you really want some details there, that could be a good one to listen to. But yeah, this whole uh, topic for today kind of started when I was chatting with someone who, I'll try to make it brief, but the backstory is, single person, doing their own thing, bought a house, met someone. Eventually, that turned into a more serious relationship. That someone moves in, and the significant other decided to pay off the remaining balance of the mortgage, and in exchange for being listed on the title of the house. So they're now co-owners of the house, not married, no kids, live together, own a house together, own a rental property together, doing a lot of things together. And then relationship sours, they split up, and the person who bought the house originally just assumed, all right, so and so is going to move out. I'll have to pay them back whatever they contributed to the mortgage. And initially, that was kind of the plan. I'll pay you back the what you originally put in plus appreciation in the home value because the home value has gone up. So all right, fair enough, we'll get an appraiser, figure out what I owe you. And then the person who had moved out said, actually, change of plans, I want the house, I'll buy you out cash. And that's when it got spicy. I don't know the end of the story, but it sounds like they're um they both have a legal right to the home. They're both listed on the title. So they either can get some lawyers involved or one person can stand down and just, you either buy out the other or take the cash, go buy another house. A lot of options there. But yeah, definitely splitting up, not fun. And it makes it trickier when there's not like a formal agreement in place. So that's where, like, if you start a business with a partner, you're going to have a partnership agreement that kind of spells out how this relationship's going to work, who gets what, if one of us leaves or dies, are the shares getting bought out? That would be the argument for having a prenup or a postnup in a relationship. Or if you're
Or if
not,
you're not married, yeah, just some
yeah,
sort of real estate holding arrangement, like an agreement that you have ahead of time.
bingo. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, you don't have to be married to have a relationship. I know plenty of people unmarried, have families together, live together, happy, you know, life. But, there's not that legal document binding them. But still, if, they end up splitting up, all right, you got kids, custody stuff, I would imagine it's a very similar process, for guardianship and custody arrangements, whether you're married or not, what's going to be in the kid's best interest. But with, assets, it's a maybe a little more straightforward when you're married because there's some precedents that are set by the state for how that's going to play out. But when you're not married, it's, you know, who's the better negotiator? What's the,
Who has
I
the better
mean,
lawyer?
who has the better lawyer?
Yeah.
Who's, how stubborn are each of you? So but yeah, having some sort of agreement in place, as awkward as it can be when you're in a relationship or starting in a new relationship. Hey, let's sign a contract that spells out how we're gonna break up one day. Like, that's not fun or romantic. Um, but in hindsight, probably would be wish they would have done it.
Yeah. I do have clients who bought a bunch of properties together when they originally weren't married and they had real estate like agreements. I think it was a real estate partnership agreement, I believe is what it was called. And this is something absolutely like consult with an attorney about for sure. But, some careful planning can just mean less drama and less cost down the road, because if now each person has to hire an attorney to try to like argue this out in court and things like that, that can get very expensive as well. So and realistically, like people split up. Maybe it's not romantic, but nothing about money is really romantic anyway. So whatever, just like
Yeah. And it's not even at that point about the money. It's like, hey, you're willing to give me cash for the fair market value of my house. I can just go buy another house at the going rate, same type of house, same neighborhood, even if I wanted to, or different neighborhood. But I mean, at that point, it's not about money. You're like, I don't want to move. This is my home. I bought it. You're taking it from me. Like, what the hell? So but there, the finances will work out just fine. It's, it's the other aspect of it that's harder to deal with, I guess, if you will.
yeah, absolutely. Yep. So I think that when we're thinking about planning for couples, first thing first is that as you get to the point where you are ready to start combining your finances with your partner, whatever that means to you, it's a great idea to just get a basic understanding of what your partner's financial situation looks like, what your financial situation looks like on its own, but also what your goals are. So are you a person who really wants to maintain financial independence? Like, do you want to just know that if you needed to pay all the bills on your own, you could? Like, take that into consideration. If you really just want to make it easier to pay your household bills because now you're living together and it's getting annoying to Venmo each other all the time, like that can be a goal. That's totally worthwhile to think about. If you want to just alleviate some stress because you have some uncertainty about your partner's financial situation, like maybe you're concerned about their debt or you're concerned about them not saving enough or something like that. Some open communication is going to help with that. It may not solve that problem, but it might help a little bit. um,
Communication, yeah, I think in all
yeah.
relationships, romantic or not, like communication is paramount.
Yep. I think we're getting to a point in society where talking about money is a little bit more socially acceptable. It's still one of those like kind of taboo things. But when you're sharing household expenses with someone, it's really important to know that they can pay their half of the bills if you're splitting them in half, like that they have some backup money if they need it and they lose their job and like things like that, just some basics. And a lot of times when we're thinking about a partner that we plan to spend a very, very long time with, we also want to make sure we know like what are their long-term goals? What are my long-term goals? Are they compatible? Are we on track together? Are you expecting one partner to kind of like take on most of the load for those long-term goals? Because sometimes there's a pretty large, gap in income between one partner and another. So those long-term goals are really important to think about too if you're thinking of this as a long-term relationship. I would suggest like if you haven't done a net worth statement yourself in the past, that's literally where you write down like everything that you own on a piece of paper and everything you owe money on a piece of paper, and you just subtract all the debts that you have from your assets, from the things that you own, and that's like where we're starting at. That's your net worth. And if you and your partner can each do that, so you know what your separate financial circumstances look like, and then you can combine it potentially. You don't have to, like some people do, some people don't. But then when you combine it, like that's your overall household picture of where you're at right now financially. And that can be a great way to just have some documentation of that. It can be really useful if you are planning to get married and you want to do like a prenup. Like part of a prenup is just assessing what your assets are before you enter a marriage. You can also do it after you get married. There's something called a postnup, and again, Corey referred back to that episode we did with the family planning attorney, and that one is a great one to refer back to for any sort of legal insights. But all of those things are really helpful. Like the more knowledge you have, the better. So that's a great starting point. Talk about goals, talk about current financial situations, just get it all out there in the open.
Yeah, that communication again, communication and setting expectations. Like, to your point, if knowing if your partner can carry their weight, it's like, well, if we go into a relationship, maybe we have disparate incomes, but if you expect your partner to pull half the, cover half the bills and expenses and, half of the financial aspects of the relationship, but that's not practical, that's going to lead to some uncomfortable moments. But if we go in knowing like, hey, I make more than you, that's fine. You contribute this much, I contribute that much, it all works out. I'll pay the mortgage, you pay the utilities. Like, and then when we get married, it's generally kind of all pooled together, even though some people like to keep their finances separate. We have a joint account for the bills, and then we each kind of do our own thing on the retirement saving side of thing. Whatever works for you, that's fine, but it's all about communicating with each other and making sure we're all on the same page and know what to expect. And this goes beyond the finances, with household chores, childcare, etc. And I think most couples kind of naturally fall into set roles, whether they planned it that way or it just kind of naturally happens. It's like, all right, do the dishes, I do the grocery shopping, make the meals, I clean up, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I think kind of it naturally happens that way to where you kind of each fill in yeah, a consistent role over time. But yeah, that communication piece is, I think, throughout this whole episode and with all financial planning is key.
Yeah, absolutely, especially with couples. Yeah. So I think another question we get a lot from clients is like, when is the right time to start thinking about combining finances? And we can't decide that for you. Like, that's really different for everyone. But again, open and honest communication, especially when you get to the point where you're living together. I think that's a good, like, jumping off point where it's like, okay, now we're both taking part in paying household bills. So you want to make sure that you at least can rely on that person to pay whatever portion of bills that you have decided as as a couple that you're willing to assign to each other. And managing shared expenses can be kind of challenging. So for some people at that point when they move in together, it's easier to set up just like a joint checking account. Like I've determined that our household bills are $5,000 a month. My share is 40%, your share is 60%. So I'm going to put in 2,000 and you're going to put in 3,000. And now we have $5,000 to pay all of our household bills every month. And it's just like an automatic deposit into that joint checking account. That's a great way to just start thinking about combining things like early on if you're living together. And then over time, it really just depends on like how you want to manage things. We talk a lot about like, should we start planning these things together? Should we start planning them separately? And I have clients who do things both ways. I'm sure you do also, Corey. Some people are like, I really want to make sure I'm financially independent. And other people are like, it's all the same. Let's put it all together in the pot.
Yeah, I think it's when people get married, I mean, maybe in the very beginning, especially if there's no kids involved, some people will keep things separate. But I would say the more time that elapses, and especially the more intertwined the relationship becomes, the more everything just gets merged into one. Now, I do have clients that, some have all their bank accounts joint, some still keep separate checking and savings accounts. Teach their own, doesn't matter. Eventually you kind of the bill, like some bills come out of one account or two accounts, and you figure it out. People like having their own checking account for their own spending, whatever, or just laziness. Hey, we just haven't gotten around to changing our accounts because it's annoying. You got to like do stuff and it's low on the priority list. um so I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. I guess if I was to lean one way, I would say the less accounts you have, the easier things are, simpler, less stuff to
Mm-hmm.
look at and keep track of. So I'd probably say just merge it and go with a joint checking, joint savings, high five, call it a day. But if you want to have four accounts, each of you has a joint checking or each of you has an individual checking and savings, good for you. Don't care. Just again, make sure you're on the same page, communicate. And but it's the planning side of it, planning for retirement, we're planning for kids' college, how much do we need to be saving, debts, how much do we put towards paying down the mortgage? Do we want to pay it off more aggressively or not? That's where the again communication theme comes into play. And that's what Rochelle and I do on a daily basis, helping clients who may have differing goals and opinions. Like
Hmm.
everyone who's in a relationship, Rochelle, you and your husband, me and
Oh,
Lindsay,
for
like
sure.
we have different objectives for some things financially. It's like, I want to do this, you want to do that. All right, well, we can't do them both. Let's find a compromise. Um, you know, hopefully you come to agreements on more things than not, but there's going to be areas where you've got to, make some decisions and we can't do everything that everyone wants to do. Um, you could, as a physician with your income earning potential, you could do pretty much anything you want. Do you want the big house? Do you want the nice cars? Do you want the nice vacations? Do you want to retire early? Do you want to pay for kids' college? You can do all those things. You just can't do all of them simultaneously. You can't have all of them at once. You can pick and choose. All right, we can have the, you know, big house and retire early, but we're not paying for our kids to go to college and we're not taking nice vacations. There's going to be some trade-offs, no
Hmm.
matter, what your objectives are.
Yeah. A lot of times, in meetings with clients, sometimes they're figuring this out during the meeting. Like that maybe they've never even had that discussion before. Maybe they never thought about it. I especially think that with really young physicians, it's surprising to me how many times I'm like, hey, what do you want retirement to look like? Do you kind of want to retire on the early end or later? It's surprising to me how often people are like, oh, I don't really know. I hadn't really thought about it. I'm like, really?
You're just
Then,
tunnel vision trying to get through residency and
yeah,
fellowship and,
right.
get that first job, wake up in your mid 30s. Oh, yeah, I need to think about not working one day.
Right. And it makes sense. I think people are very focused on the next step, the next step, the next step. But it's like, okay, let's take a step back and figure out why we're doing this for a second. I do think
Also,
like,
really quick on that note, I
yeah,
like when, I'll meet with folks early on. They're like, oh, I plan to work forever. I don't want to retire. I'll work till I'm 70. And then, 5, 10 years later, it's like, yeah, I can't stand medicine. I want to get out.
I know. It
And
doesn't
that
happen
maybe,
to everyone. Don't like if you're listening to this and you love your job, don't think that you're automatically going to hate it at some point, but it happens for sure. But maybe
and
it means you need a new job.
And that might be an extreme example, but it's like, going from I don't ever see myself quitting to, yeah, eventually I'm going to want to retire. And
Yeah,
so,
for sure. Yeah. No one wants to work forever, even if they think they do. Well, maybe, I don't know. I guess some people do. I shouldn't say no one. Okay. Anyway, retirement accounts are kind of interesting because they're always separate. Like it could potentially be a marital asset depending on what kind of state you live in and things like that. That gets pretty complicated. But, you have your retirement plan at work. If your partner works, they have their retirement plan at work. If you set up an individual retirement or like a Roth IRA or something like that, it's not a joint account. It's an individual account. That's what it's called, an individual retirement account. So there are some assets that will always kind of remain separate. I one thing that I want to mention real quick is that once in a while, when I have clients who are sort of like together as a household but managing their finances separately, it's hard for the person that has the smaller paycheck to get their mind around like maxing out their retirement plan at work. Because if they try to get $23,000 into a retirement plan at work, that could be a lot of their paycheck. And they're like, but I need my paycheck. But I'm like, but you don't. Like if you adjust how you're managing the household finances a little bit, you don't. And this benefits both of you because you get some big tax deductions if you're putting aside money in this retirement plan. So it benefits both of you. So if you need to like make some adjustments where you're maybe contributing a little bit less to the bills, so that you can max out your retirement plan, that benefits the household as a whole. But that can be a really challenging discussion for some people who are like, my job is to pay $3,000 a month towards the household bills. And, if I'm maxing out my retirement plan, I can't anymore. I'm like, okay, I think maybe you need to discuss together adjusting those goals and responsibilities because maybe you shouldn't be responsible for $3,000 a month towards the bill. But that can be an interesting and complicated conversation to have with people sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, when you're
Hmm.
married, it's all the same pot. You're one for
Hmm.
this purpose, financial planning wise. Um,
It
it's
can be a big mental hurdle for people sometimes.
100% is what it is. It's a mental hurdle. It's like, all right,
Yeah.
you make, 300,000, you make 50,000. Who cares? You guys make 350,000. Doesn't matter whose paycheck it comes from. That's how much we make. And if we have access to two pre-tax retirement accounts, awesome. Double the fun. We can put in 46,000 this year pre-tax instead of just 23,000 if it's a single worker. Let's take advantage of that, even if it means the 50,000 income earner practically all of their paycheck is going to retirement savings
And
uh,
taxes.
and taxes, and they might net $1,000 a month after that.
Right.
It's like whatever. It's all the same pot at the end of the day.
Hmm. Yeah. One other thing, just talking about bank accounts of like, should we do joint? Should we do separate? All that kind of stuff. I would encourage anyone who has, like household expenses, if you're living with your partner, that you have an emergency reserve that is adequate for the household to pay the household bills for 3 to 6 months. So whether that is in separate accounts, like as long as you know that between you and your partner, you have enough to cover those bills, that's great. I think it probably would be easier if that like household emergency reserve were a joint account. It doesn't have to be, but just make sure that whatever it is, you're aware of how much your partner has and that between the two of you, you have those adequate reserves.
Unless we're having fewer accounts can be beneficial. Like if
Hmm.
you each have your own individual checking and savings. You also have a joint checking and savings. We got 6 bank accounts and we've got a little bit in each of them. Maybe combined we have 100,000, but the most that's in any one account is 30,000. I often will come across this in meetings. It's like, oh, well, I really want to get to 60,000 to have a healthy emergency reserve. It's like, well, you've got 100. It's just spread out. And you're only just looking at the one account with your name on it, unfortunately. So that's where having
Hmm.
those, financial planning meetings, whether with an advisor or not, but where you look at your net worth, you look at all of your stuff in aggregate and can, say, oh, yeah, we actually do have a very healthy amount in the bank, even though it doesn't feel like it when I just look at my individual checking and savings account.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So combining accounts, insurances. So when we're married or not, we're living together. We're one as a household. We got to have certain insurances. Health insurance, big one. Which health insurance plan do we use? Are we double insured with each of our employers? Don't care. Whatever one seems to be the most appropriate for your family, go with that one. Whether it's better benefits, lower cost, doesn't really matter on that front. Disability and life insurance. I mean, these ones definitely important. Obviously, if you rely on your income, you need disability insurance. But if we are both working and earning income, there could be an argument in certain scenarios that we don't necessarily need to insure 100% of each partner's income. Um, if we're living below our means, you may be able to get by with, only insuring 75% of your earnings. But at the same time, if you were both to get disabled, we definitely see a decrease in money coming in. So those are conversations to have, numbers to look at. Are we on track to reaching our goals? Are we ahead of schedule, et cetera? If there's disparate incomes, maybe one spouse is the primary breadwinner, the other works part-time, making a small amount. Do we need to insure the smaller income? Again, case by case basis, but definitely, uh, you know, some conversations to have. The life insurance front, it's not just purely a loss of income that we're calculating. It's also the family contribution as well. Child care, housekeeping, etc. If you were to lose your partner, yes, we lose their income, assuming we're both working. Um, but also, what other value do they provide if you lose them? And now we have to maybe hire a nanny to assist because, you're a doctor and you're not,
Or work less.
yeah, or you have to cut down at work to be with your
Hmm.
kids more. All right. So now we're taking a bigger hit than just losing their annual salary. So those are, I think, both spouses, even if there's a stay-at-home spouse who's not working, I'm a big believer that you should have insurance on the stay-at-home spouse because if you were to play the hypothetical game, all right, let's realistically plan that my spouse is no longer here. What's life going to look like? All right, we got to work, we got kids, we got responsibilities, grocery shopping, laundry, driving kids to and from their activities. Yeah, we can piecemeal together stuff, get the neighbors to take them to activities, your carpool, but there's going to have to be some areas where you either cut out or hire outside help to accomplish that. Um, and even just like having some money coming in to give yourself some breathing room. It's like, hey, I just lost my partner, the love of my life. Like maybe I want to take some time off work and mourn. I don't know,
Hmm.
or work a little less while I figure things out and go to therapy for 6 months. Like there's a lot
And
of,
spend time with your kids if you have them.
yeah, spend time with your kids. They just lost their mom or dad. Like maybe we need to kind of reground ourselves and figure out how we're going to move on. So
Yeah.
having a life insurance check come through can at least alleviate some of the financial decisions and challenges that you might face as a result. And it can give you that option to take time off work to be with the kids or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. I think one last one is just liability protection. We talk about personal liability protection, which is like umbrella coverage that you can add onto your home and auto insurance. And then, like your homeowner's insurance and your auto insurance also has a liability component. But basically, like if are subject to a lawsuit, if there's a claim and then, like someone is awarded money from you, like if they're joint assets, my understanding is like if they're unprotected, not in a retirement account, that lawsuit can, take those joint assets also, like from a bank account, from a brokerage account, like places like that. They can garnish wages. So liability protection is important. And like the umbrella liability coverage that you can add onto your home and auto insurance is actually really inexpensive generally. It's maybe 15 to 20 bucks a month for $1 million of extra, like of liability protection. So it's worth looking into just to make sure that you have your assets protected a little bit.
And it varies by location. Every state and insurance company is a little different. But yeah, I think the more you get, the cheaper it is too. I want to say
Yeah.
I've got 5 million and I think it's under 500 a year. But you get like those
Yeah.
multi-policy discounts with some
Right.
companies. So like I had one client where they added an umbrella policy to their home and auto package and it actually reduced their overall rates
Hmm.
across the board because it's like, oh, you have three policies, you get a 15% discount. And it's like, oh, the umbrella is so cheap, it actually made my home and auto less expensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm
I know in
saving
some
money by
places
adding
it's,
it.
yeah, I do know in some places it's more expensive. Like in California, it seems to be ridiculously expensive. So case by case basis, but a good one to look into. Just kind of dovetailing on the life insurance conversation, it's important as like relationships start to develop that you start thinking about how you want assets to be left behind if you were to pass away. So it goes beyond life insurance. Like as things start getting more serious, you should review your beneficiary designation, on your 403(b), your 401(k), or IRAs if you have them. Like maybe when you first set it up, you put your mom or your dad or a brother or sister down or something like that. And maybe, you get to the point where that's not what you want anymore. So just make sure you're revisiting that every once in a while. Like at some point, it may be that you want your partner or spouse to be the beneficiary on those accounts. And then also, will and estate planning can be really important, like especially if you're in a serious relationship and you want to leave assets behind that do not have beneficiary designations. If you have an individual brokerage account, if it's not like a transfer on death account with someone specifically designated to inherit those assets, then it just goes through probate and probably will go to like your closest relative. It's not going to go to like your unmarried partner, very likely. Like that's determined by the state. So lots of things like that can be revisited as relationships get more serious. And I think the other thing is that there tends to be one partner that takes on the bulk of like knowing about the finances, especially as things get more serious. They're just like naturally a lot of times is the person who likes to talk about it more, or like likes to learn about it, likes to invest more. And it's really important that the other partner has at least a basic understanding of what the financial situation is, or at least knows who to talk to. Like if something happens to you, you don't want them to be in a situation where they don't even know what to do. Like they're just completely out of their depth. So obviously not everyone wants to talk about money all the time, but it's important to have a really basic understanding and know who to talk to if something happens in worst case scenario.
Good game to play on road trips. If you're the person who generally is in charge of the money, quiz your spouse. All right, if I die, where's the will? Who do you call? What company is our life insurance with? Um, yeah, it's a
Just
good,
call Corey. He knows
good.
all the stuff. We don't
Yeah.
need to.
So I tell Lindsay, just call my office and they'll
Yeah,
take care
exactly.
of you.
Like call
But
Anders.
we're in a different circumstance than
Absolutely.
most people. It's like, but it's good to have a basic understanding where to go. Yeah, if you're working with Rachelle and I, make sure you both have Rachelle and I's contact info, and we'll be able to help you sort through everything. But if you're not working with a financial planner, um,
You need
the
a list. You need
yeah,
like passwords. You need all the things, or
yeah,
else someone is just going to be in a really, really challenging spot.
have the if I die letter and put it in the safe in your closet. And here's all where all the websites and passwords and logins and names, contacts, etc. Update it periodically as your things change. But yeah, the estate planning piece, huge, married or not. We want to make sure that if we die, things happen the way we want them to happen. Who's in charge of decisions, who's going to inherit our stuff, who's in charge of the kids, if we have kids, how's money to be handled, all those fun end of life things or post mortem
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. I think
Um,
if you are unmarried, just having like that power of attorney in place is important. Like generally, like a hospital will defer to the closest family member. If you're not married, they might not care at all, like what you think. And obviously, that will depend on a lot of things that I don't understand, like way above my head with estate planning law. But that power of attorney will help a lot in being able to like designate someone specifically who you would like to make medical decisions for you and financial decisions for you if you're incapacitated. So if you're unmarried, I think that's really important to think about. Um, there, if you're married or not, will matter more depending on where you live. So it's like if you live in a community property state, it really matters if you're married or if you're not married. And that just means like in a community property state, if you do separate all of your marital assets, so all of the assets that you've kind of accumulated since you got married are divided in half. Like they just consider everything like half one person's, half the others if you have been married. If you have not been married, it's not that situation. So I think understanding where you live is really important, and potentially consulting with like an accountant and an attorney is important as well, just to especially if you have a lot of assets. Just make sure you understand what happens if you split up, or you understand what the rights are of each partner in those kinds of situations.
yep. Speaking of splitting up, also depends
Mhm.
somewhat where you live.
Yeah.
But it's there. If you're married, there's certain rules that the state has, like, hey, if you've been married at least this amount of time, spouse is entitled to half or whatever the case may be.
Hmm.
Lawyers can get involved if you don't think whatever the state's rules are should apply to you. But other states are, not as straightforward. And, again, married or not, we talked in the beginning about unmarried couple fighting over who gets to keep the house, that was originally bought by one of the individuals. So it is again going to vary somewhat state by state, somewhat how good your attorney is. This is where having the prenup or the postnup could come in handy. It's, hey, this is what we originally agreed on. You signed it and dated it, initialed it, put blood on the sheet of paper. Like, it's all legal. We pinky swore. So I mean, no one likes to break up. It's not fun, but it's gonna
Even
happen.
when you don't have intermingled finances, it's not fun. So this is
Yeah,
just another layer of complication to make it even less fun.
it's gonna happen for some of you, but that's where, again, having the open lines of communications beforehand while you're level-headed and not in an emotional state would be helpful. And even having that all written down in a formal document can help streamline the process, cut down on legal fees, etc. Obviously, if we're married, it becomes a little bit different versus not married in terms of what the state's rules are. There's things like QDRO, a qualified domestic relation order, right? Where the
Something like
state,
that.
yeah, the state basically says, here's what you have to do as part of this breakup. And it's helpful when splitting up retirement accounts if need be. So let's say, one spouse, is the income earner, the other's a stay-at-home spouse, and the income earner is the one who put all the money in retirement accounts, 401ks, et cetera. The stay-at-home spouse doesn't have a workplace retirement plan, but the state says, hey, this spouse is entitled to call it half of the retirement assets. So we need to split this retirement account in half. Now, there's not going to be tax implication. I mean, normally you withdraw money from a retirement account. That's a taxable event plus a penalty, but with the court order, it's not. It's just, hey, we're going to create a separate account in the.
And it has to stay in a retirement account. That's how you avoid taxes.
Mhm.
But it's just
Yep.
setting up a separate retirement account for the spouse that didn't have one to begin
Yep. And then the money's transferred over, kind of a pain in the butt to do on our end administratively,
with.
but it's,
Part of our job.
yeah, it's possible. It's just paperwork basically. Um, Yeah, real estate, another tricky one. You can't divide a house in half, unfortunately. It's easy to split up a retirement account monetarily. It's harder to divide a physical structure. So usually one party gets to keep the house, the other doesn't, and they factor in the value of the house. It's like, all right, you get the house, I keep the retirement accounts. If you're ever in a breakup, I would encourage you to keep the retirement accounts, not the house. It's going to be worth more over the long run. Just a pro tip from a financial planner. You can buy a new house. You can't go back and save for 20 years in a Roth IRA. Um, but but yeah, it's or do we just sell the property? Like there's a couple that lives up the street from us in a nice home that's on the market because they're splitting up, and they, I guess, they can't either afford to keep it for one of them, or they just need to sell it to
Or
move
maybe
past the
neither of
memories.
them wants to live there anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, so who knows? But whatever. Maybe we sell it, maybe one spouse keeps it. Yeah, good to either have it detailed in a prenup or have a good lawyer in place to figure out. And maybe we both amicably,
Amicably.
the word,
Yep.
friendly terms agree on how we're gonna do it. But um man,
Yeah.
communication, expectations, if you have it in writing, makes it easier. Otherwise, I guess get a good attorney if there's disagreements.
hmm I think the other thing, like the other reason that open communication is really important when you're intermingling your finances and things like that is that you just don't want any unwelcome surprises down the road, even if you're not splitting up. Like, oh crap, you have how much debt? Or oh, we've been together for 15 years and you haven't saved anything for retirement. That's kind of problematic. Like these are conversations we don't want to have 10 or 15 years down the road. Those are things you want to know about ahead of time so that you can successfully like create a plan to make sure that everyone's on track for long-term goals. So, oh man. Oh, we're so cheesy, Corey. Open
I just think
communication is
with
so
the
important.
communication and knowing everything about your partner, I think of that scene in This Is 40 where Paul Rudd's like holding the mirror trying to see if he has a hemorrhoid, and Leslie Mann walks in. She's like, I wish there was at least one part of our relationship where that was kept secret from each other. Um, so yeah, maybe keep your hemorrhoids to yourselves, but keep your finances more open.
Good advice from
Words of
Corey,
wisdom.
as always. Okay,
uh,
on that note, thank you for listening, everyone.
yeah. See you later.